Hi, this is A New Nigeria with Wale Oluwade. This is your current affairs program where we critically examine the strategic issues bedeviling Nigeria's developmental aspirations and boldly offer practical suggestions on building the Nigeria of our collective desires. Today's episode promises to be engaging and exciting. In today's edition of the program, we're continuing the presentation I began a few weeks ago where I evaluated the three strategic issues I believe Nigeria needs to get right if we're to make that giant leap forward. And these issues are, number one, jobs creation and poverty eradication. Number two, how do we manage our crude oil resources for better efficiency and productivity? And number three, power, availability, and sufficiency, which is what we're dealing with today. It has been said by the World Bank and other global bodies, 92 million Nigerians don't have access to grid electricity. This represents 43% of the country's population and makes Nigeria the country with the largest energy access deficit in the world. This lack of reliable power is a significant constraint for citizens and businesses, resulting in annual economic losses estimated at about 26.2 billion US dollars, which, when translated in today's exchange rate, is well over 26 trillion naira, which represent about 2% of our entire GDP. According to the 2020 World Bank Ease of Doing Business report, Nigeria ranks 171 out of 190 countries in getting electricity, and electricity access is seen as one of the major constraints for the real sector, that is manufacturing and industrial sectors. Also, improving access, availability, and sufficiency of electricity is strategic to eradicating poverty and unlocking economic growth through the provision of jobs, increasing revenues in non-oil sectors, boosting exports, earning forex, and ensuring peace and stability in the polity. Yet, what are some of the issues that have held this sector down, and what are the solutions to this? These are some of the issues we're examining in this presentation. We'll take this short break, and when I return, we'll get right into the presentation. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. Now, let's get right into the presentation today. The topic of the presentation is strategies for power availability and sufficiency in Nigeria. I thought it was smart to give a brief, what I could call education to maybe some of our viewers who are students or young, who really don't know how electricity works. Electricity generation, transmission, and distribution. So this slide basically, gives us an overview of the whole idea of electricity, how it is generated, transmitted, and distributed. So power plant generates the electricity, either from the dams or from the thermal stations or even solar panels and all of that. And then it goes through the transformers, that steps up the voltage for transmission. So you have the transmission lines, those massive ones you see on the roads or on the highways. And then when it gets to our neighborhoods, there's a transformer also that steps it down and then finally being distributed to our various homes. So this is basically how electricity works, the entire process of how it is generated, transmitted, and then distributed to consumers, whether homes or industries. Let me give a brief history on of electricity in Nigeria. So the generation of electricity began in Nigeria in 1896 when the first power plant was built in Lagos. However, it was not until 1929 when the Nigeria Electricity Supply Company, NESCO, was established as an electric utility company. The colonial government enacted the Electricity Corporation of Nigeria Statute of 1950, commonly known as ECN, in order to effectively coordinate the electricity development across Nigeria. Post-independence, the military regime promulgated Decree number 24 of 1st April 1972, and the Electricity Corporation of Nigeria and the Niger Dam Authority were merged to form the National Electric Power Authority. Almost every Nigerian who is maybe 10 years old will know NEPA, the notorious utility company called NEPA. So as population grew exponentially and successive governments failed to effectively plan and invest in the power sector, initial teething challenges soon became commonplace and demands for power outstripped supply capacity. Also, key generation infrastructure began to deteriorate and collapse. Now, reforms began in the power sector. With the return to civilian rule in the year 2000, the President Olusegun Obasanjo administration embarked on a far-reaching reforms of the power sector by constituting a 9-man technical committee known as the Electric Power Implementation Committee, EPIC. The EPIC reported directly to the President, and its mandate included, amongst others, number one, to ensure uninterrupted power supply by December 31, 2001, to generate 4,000 megawatts by the stated date, to restructure NEPA to meet present-day realities, and also to encourage private sector participation in the industry. The committee prepared the National Electric Power Policy in 2001 and the National Energy Policy in 2003. The overall theme being optimal utilization of the nation's energy resources from fossil fuels and renewable sources for sustainable development with the active participation of the private sector. In addition, the EPIC committee established the National Independent Power Project, NIPP, in 2004 as a fast-track government-funded initiative to stabilize the power sector. Now, this committee also drafted the Electric Power Sector Reform Act, EPSRA 2005, which was the principal legislation governing the power sector in Nigeria until just June 2003, or 2023, that is this year. The EPSRA Section 1 proposed the incorporation of an initial holding company called Power Holding Company of Nigeria. So some of these names that you've been hearing, this is the genesis of some of those entities or those bodies that you've been hearing. The Power Holding Company was created by Section 1 of the EPSRA 2005. Also, in Section 31 of the EPSRA, established the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC. That's the regulator for the entire electricity sector. Additional notable objectives of the EPSRA includes allowance for the creation of generation and distribution companies, otherwise fondly called GenCos and DISCos, respectively. You'll see this as we go on. Of course, transmission of electricity remained the sole preserve of the government through the Transmission Company of Nigeria. In 2006, the Nigeria Bulk Electricity Trading Company, PLC, NBET, was established and charged with the role of bulk trading. It buys the power from the DISCos, and sells to consumers and also collect payments and all of that. Next slide, 5. Okay. The reforms continue. So following a 2-year delay due to elections and transition in government, actually the delay was President Yar'Adua took over from President Obasanjo, set up, rather than continue, rather set up investigation into the process, and that stalled, the progress that was made under President Obasanjo. However, in December 2010, with the request for the submission of bids from prospective private investors, so the process continued 2013. So in 2013, the Bureau of Public Enterprises, BPE, held a bid round to auction at least 51% ownership of the 4 thermal generation plants, 2 hydropower generation plants, and 11 distribution companies held by the Power Holding Company. By the end of 2014, the government was able to completely hand over the power generation and distribution assets into private hands, but transmission remained under government ownership, just like we said earlier. Now, Nigeria generates most of the power through thermal and hydro, with an installed capacity of 13.5 thousand megawatts. We have an installed capacity, and I want you to pay attention to the word installed capacity, which is different from what is actually sent out or what is available, to consumers. Okay, so we talked about the bid processes. So these are the companies, that took over that took over the NEPA assets. So these are the 5 generating companies, the GenCos, as you call them: Egbe Generation Company, Stama, Geregu, Ugeli, Kainji, Shiroro. This was the amount they paid. And then these are the distribution companies, then Abuja Distribution, Benin, and all of that, Ibadan, Jos, Kano. Now, of the generation companies currently that are connected to the national grid, this is what we have currently. AFAM, is a successor generation companies. All of these are successor generation companies, of those who took over from NEPA. So you have all of this. Then you have under the independent power producers. So you have Shell, you have Ajib, you have Alaoji is part of the Nigeria Integrated Power Project. So you have all of this under that. What was the structure of the Nigerian electricity supply industry? The former structure before privatization, before the reforms began, it was NEPA that was responsible for generation, transmission, distribution, power sector regulation, and power sector liability. And that was the reason why NEPA was never, NEPA was not efficient at all. It was notorious for being inefficient, for being an inefficient utility company. And that was the reason for the reforms and the privatization. And now, so NEPA was unbundled, and then now you have Nigerian Electricity Liability Management Company. Then you have the GENCOs, you have the transmission companies, you have MBET, with the bulk trader I mentioned earlier. You have NEC, the regulator, and then you have the distribution company. So post-privatization, this is the new structure of the industry. But with the new passage of the new law in 2023, the Electricity Act, this is about to change. But let's go forward. What is the entire value chain of the electricity industry? This is a diagram of the entire value chain of the industry. So these are, because some of our plants, most of them actually are thermal, meaning they run on gas. So you need gas, producers and gas transporters. Of course, there are lenders and investors. So they supply gas to the GENCOs, the generation companies. So you have all of this. So from this, they come to transmission. So when they come to the transmission, you also have these other players in the value chain. And then when it when the electricity leaves the transmission grid, you have market operators, you have MBET, you have NEC, and then it comes to the DISCO. You have banks and lenders and all of that. So before it finally comes to the consumers, the customers. So this is the entire value chain in the electricity sector. What are the challenges of the sector even after the reforms? There are still challenges. And what are some of these challenges in the electricity sector? There's this quote I love. It's a French quote. My French isn't too good, otherwise I would have said it in French, but it basically means the more things change, the more they remain the same. So regardless of reforms in the Nigerian electricity supply industry, the overbearing problems in the sector persist, with privatization only changing the dimensions of the challenges. Financing remains a major problem across all the segments of the electricity supply industry, partly due to non-cost reflective tariff. Yet each segment of the industry also faces its unique challenges. For the generation companies, the segment is rife with problems of energy security and inefficiencies. In the transmission segment, the problems lie in lack of modern transmission lines and equipment, gross mismanagement, poor maintenance of available infrastructure, and inefficient grid design. The poor management of the grid, as in the last 1 decade, pushed the national grid to collapse over 134 times. I mean, all of us are familiar with the phrase about, the national grid has collapsed. It is solely because the grid management has been inept, just to put it mildly. Now, distribution companies face the problem of huge aggregate technical, commercial, and collection losses. We don't speak more on this in subsequent presentation, and even now you'll see it. So in terms of electricity access, how many Nigerians or percentage of Nigerians have access to electricity? Only 46.9% of Nigerian population remains, 46.9% of Nigerian population remains unconnected to national grid, representing 92 million people. And so the goal of attaining SDG 7 goal remains daunting. Further, electricity demand is estimated at 24,000. What we need, the electricity that we need is about let's say roughly 25,000. But as of today, what we are generating is barely 7,200 megawatts. In terms of energy use, Nigeria has the lowest in the world, 80% below its energy use based on world income levels. Now, while the federal government has set an ambitious plan to attain 75% electricity access by connecting 1.5 million households annually by 2020, that has since failed woefully. The most fundamental barrier to attaining electricity availability has been the Constitution, that's the ground norm, which made electricity an exclusive legislative item reserved solely for the federal government. But with the recent amendment, which grants electricity to subnational entities and private sector players, the legal access to generation and distribution segments of the value chain, the coast seems clear for a new dawn in this vital sector in Nigeria. The long-term solution must involve exploiting every available energy mix, coal, solar, wind, biomass, as well as small and large hydroelectric power generation, while reducing the prevalence of self-generation, which constitutes 2/3 of the present energy mix. We'll take this short break, and when I come back, we'll round up with this in this first part. Please stay with us. Welcome back. So, like I mentioned briefly, there was a target for electricity access set by the federal government of Nigeria. It set some targets. And what are these targets? That by 2016, we would have attained 40% electricity access for Nigeria. By 2020, we would have attained 75%. And by 2030, we would have attained 90%. The federal government's medium-term target was to achieve 75% access to electricity by 2020 by connecting 1.5 million households annually through grid extensions power using more renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, small and medium hydro-powered stations. This was expected to increase electricity access to 90% by 2030. So if we got this right, that is exploiting other renewable sources of power such as solar, wind, and small and medium hydropower stations, then by 2030, we would have attained 90% electricity access and also completely eradicate the incidence of self-generation via the use of personal generators. As you will see shortly, Nigeria has a very high incidence of self-generation, which is what is commonly known as generators that is all over the place, you know. So also part of the long-term plan, the transmission company of Nigeria had developed a 5-year plan of transmission system expansion that covers 2016 to 2022. This was intended to bring the wheeling capacity 5,300 currently to 20,000 megawatt by 2022 at first instance as part of short-term measure and to urgently address the shortfall in the electricity supply industry. Currently, though we have installed capacity of about 13,500, what is available for evacuation is roughly 7,200. But even of the 7,200 that is available at generation for evacuation, what we're able to evacuate is barely 5,300 megawatts through the grid. And so the problem still persists regardless of whatever the targets the federal government has set. So we've missed these 2 targets, remaining the 90% target for 2030. So the challenges continue. Now, furthermore, improving electricity supply in Nigeria and addressing barriers to achieving the energy mix targets will entail addressing payment risk, I would explain further, financing power sector investment, improving the pricing and tariff structure, MITO and SBT, that is multi-year tariff order, and then based on the service-based tariff, then gas pricing and allocation, market regulation. Also, the issue of insecurity is a critical disincentive to investment, especially in the northern region where there's a huge potential for solar energy availability, but of course the insecurity in that region will make any meaningful investment there impossible. Over and beyond the foregoing, what has ruined electrification ambitions and stifled reforms objectives are systemic corruption, structure of the industry, and over-concentration of authority at the center, lack of patriotism, and lack of adequate funding. While the country has invested well over 25 billion since 1999, yet the country remains under the cover of gross darkness. And sadly, no one or group is held accountable. Now, earlier on, we mentioned the key challenge facing DISCOs, that's the distribution company, is what is called aggregate technical, commercial, and consumption losses. Now, what is the definition? I'm sure if I explain this, it may sound a bit too technical, but just look at this. Simply means what is the energy that is imputed and what is the energy that is realized. And then, but you'll see it in the next image. It explains it simpler. It's the payment structure. You know, because the A, T, and C simply means, the basis is anybody who invests money in a business, the expectation is that you want to make profit. Nobody invests in a business that does not want to make profit. Part of the problem of the electricity sector in Nigeria is that there's no investment, and the investments will not come because the industry is not profitable. What makes it, not profitable? Now, this is the payment structure. The other slide you saw when I showed the entire value chain, began with, the gas supplier, to the GENCOs, to transmission, and then now this is the payment. So the DISCOs collect the money, they pay MBET, who is the bulk trader. MBET is meant to pay GENCOs, and then they pay suppliers. But what happens? Now, this is where the problem is. From energy input by the generating companies, they have what is called system losses. So either the gas is not supplied, or the gas, the systems even break down for whatever reason. So even if they supply, they have installed capacity of 13.5, there are losses there. So we said what is even available is about 7,500. But of the 7,500, you have a gap here. So what is available for consumers is just about 5,200. Now, of the 5,200, because the grid is weak, the grid management is poor. So you have electricity theft. People go and steal electricity directly from the streets, from cables and all of that. People do bypass, so they steal electricity, and then so that is also a loss, a gap. Now, even of those that are billed, I would explain that in fuller detail. So a few are billed. Now, of those who are billed, not all pay. So you have these three, gaps that are losses. Eventually, what is paid to the discos is not sufficient, to keep this industry profitable. And that is why investments are not coming into the sector. Next slide. Now, because of the industry not profitable, the federal government has been, subsidizing electricity. So in the last 8 years or so, this is what the federal government has paid: 2.8 trillion naira subsidy on electricity consumption. Just imagine that the federal government is subsidizing both private consumers, both industrial consumers, who are doing business. Federal government is subsidizing electricity because the discos are not earning enough to pay, for transmission, to pay the GENCOs who are generating the power, and for the GENCOs to pay gas suppliers. So federal government is standing in to pay these huge sums, every year. This year so far, we've paid 57 billion from January to June, and then, this may continue. And the discos are running at a loss. As you can see, the problem of the sector, of the industry, is actually metering, allocation, of meters. That is the problem of Nigeria. Available data from Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission showed the registered energy customer population stood at 12.78 million, of which only 4.7 million, that is 37.3, are identified customers. These are the ones that are metered, leaving an unmetered population of 8.1 million customers. Even more stunning is that of the 43, there are 43 million households in Nigeria. 43 million households. So meaning of the 20 million Nigerian population total, all of us are broken down into 43 million households. Now, of these 43 million households, only 12.7 million are registered as energy users. That is just 29.7%, leaving 30.22 million, or 69% unaccounted for. So the 30 million households, what happened to them? Of course, we say we have the highest rate of in access to electricity in Nigeria. So, but most of these are also tapping electricity illegally, and that is why the industry is not profitable. So look at the rate of electricity access in Africa compared to Nigeria. Egypt has 100% electricity access with a 109 million population, and rural and urban is 50-50. But look at it, Nigeria is the lowest with 58%. With 58% energy access, rural Nigeria is almost in total darkness. But look at Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, South Africa, Algeria, they all have, look at the rate of energy access in Nigeria. In the world, look at energy consumption per capita. What an individual consumes in America. An individual consumes 12,083 kilowatt of electricity. Germany, UK, look at what they consume compared to 129 in Nigeria. So we have a long way to go in our energy sector. Look at the energy mix. In 2016, it was 29 for gas, self-generation, that is, we're using generator. Now, in 2020, we had this goal. We didn't meet it. Now we're looking at meeting the goal in 2030. Hopefully, we're able to do that if we get our acts together. We have come to the end of this first part. Now, the concluding part shall be in subsequent episode. I urge you to stay tuned as I present the recommended solutions to the lingering problems of this most vital sector. We would examine practical case studies of what other countries have done to attain energy sufficiency. Let me restate, without electricity availability and sufficiency, all our developmental goals and aspirations remain mere fantasies. At the foundation of building a modern, prosperous, and self-reliant nation is electricity availability and sufficiency. Even God, at the dawn of creation of the heavens and earth, said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So if God couldn't create or build anything without light, then who are we? There isn't one single prosperous nation in this world that is not energy sufficient, and it is not rocket science. What then is the missing link? It is simply the will, the passion, commitment, and patriotism to get things done. I believe in a new Nigeria, and it is possible. Now, that's the end of the program today. Remember to follow me on my various social media handles. Subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can watch this particular video and the other ones that are there. Drop me a comment. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.